Greetings, programs, and welcome back to the Awesome Friday podcast, the only podcast on the entire internet with two middle-aged, cisgendered white dudes talking about movies.
Wow. Whoa.
Anything I can do to get a laugh out of Simon from the beginning is what we're going to do here. My name is Matthew, and I'm your host, and joining me this week is Simon to talk this week about Boy Kills World and Furiosa. But before we do, Simon, how are you today?
Well, how am I today? I'm okay, actually. I'm having quite a nice, relaxing weekend. We had a social thing last night, and we are watching some good movies with my kids, and that's always nice. And I am brainwashing them into thinking all the movies from the 70s to the end of the 90s are better than anything made now. So that's really going to put them in good stead for when they have to go and socialize as adults. Mm-hmm. My daughter's going to be 10 in a week, which is terrifying. So that means I have two kids, both in double digits. And time moves on, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. And it's.
I mean, that's true. That's very true.
My little baby's gonna not be a baby anymore. But yeah.
I mean, she's always going to be your baby. That's never going to change.
She is. So I don't know if I talked about this before in the podcast, but she is a young woman in a world designed for men, and I've been telling her that for a long time. And she, I said, you can do whatever you want when you get old enough to go and take buses yourself, to socialize. Like, you'll have freedom to do whatever you want, as long as you take a martial art and start now. As long as you can defend yourself. That's my only thing. And she's, unlike my son, who is only happy when he's engaged in some kind of physical activity. She would rather read until the end of time. There's not enough books in this universe for her. She would just want to sit and read. She's not really into stuff, so I forced her to do the only martial art that was available in our local community center is called Shorinji Kempo, which turns out is the Japanese interpretation of Shaolin Kung Fu. And this has been incredible for her. And I used to play fight with her a lot, and I can't now because she doesn't pull her punches. And they've taught her there's this punching technique that you probably know about, because it feels like the kind of thing you would know about, where you don't just punch with one arm, you whip your opposite arm backwards, so it spins your hip into your punch, and it looks incredible. She looks like she should be in a video game. And they've taught her eye gouges, and yesterday they taught her the bear paw, which is for breaking bones in cheeks, in chins and noses. And we've just got her a punch bag. She wants to practice at home. She's absolutely hell-bent on punching and practicing at home. So I'm very happy about that. It's really great. And honestly, surprise, surprise, it's done wonders for her posture and her physicality as well. And I love how she's connected with it. So that makes me really happy.
Yeah, I mean, remember, folks, punching comes from the back foot and the torso, not from the arm. So you definitely want to get your whole body behind a punch. Body mechanics are super interesting, and I'm glad she's learning them, because this is a terrible world that she's living in.
It really is.
Yeah.
How are you? What have you been up to?
Not much, actually. Just watching a bunch of movies. I need to make my post about the movies I saw in May soon, and update my Letterboxd profile for June.
Oh, what's your theme gonna be?
I don't know. I haven't decided. That's why I haven't done it yet. Last month was Danny Boyle movies, which I don't know if you picked up on, but we will see. But May was a really good month for movies for me. I don't know what you saw that was new in May, but I saw a number of things that I'm very happy I finally saw. Up to and including, I saw The Limey for the first time, which was like one of the only Soderberghs I'd never seen. I saw obviously some new stuff, Furiosa. I saw Red Rooms, which was up for a Canadian Screen Award for Best Film this year from last year, which is a great Quebecois film. It was a May is a great month for film, and I'm super excited to see, because June is looking to be as good or better, starting with Hitman, which we've already seen yesterday, and
I want to see that.
I can't wait for more people to see it, because it's interesting. The reviews on Letterboxd and that are very like, it's the best thing I've ever seen, or
That's a Netflix film, right? It's a Netflix film that's had a theatrical release, so it'll be on streaming pretty soon, I guess.
It's a Netflix film that got a Canadian theatrical release. So it'll be on Netflix eventually, but it got a theatrical run here, but actually not in the States. So I think that's interesting. But it is very. I mean, if you like Glenn Powell, if you don't like Glenn Powell, this will be the one that'll change your mind, probably, because he's very good in it. Regardless of what you think of the movie itself, he's very good in it. And if there's, we got to go to the cinema for the mid-range movies if we want them to keep putting mid-range movies in cinemas. So I encourage everyone to do that.
Yes, true. Good point.
Yeah.
So what we start off with this week? What would you?
We're going to talk about. Let's talk about Boy Kills World first, because it is technically a little older, and we didn't like it as much as the second movie. And I like to end on a high note. So why don't you give us the basic rundown of Boy Kills World?
Boy Kills World is a film where a young boy sees his mum brutally murdered by a government, a fascist government, and basically is then molded into a machine for vengeance. He trains in physical combat, or is trained in this case, by his mentor, the shaman, who we learn later what his part in this is. But basically, it's Bill Skarsgård is the adult version of the boy, and he's ripped to shit, and his whole plan is vengeance against the female leader of this overbearing Hunger Games government, played by Famke Janssen. And there's a tipping point. There is the spark ignites, and the rest of the movie is him killing as many people as possible. It's in that way. If you saw Monkey Man earlier this year, it's very similar premise and very similar kind of idea of where the film goes. Just execution is rather different. And through him fighting, there's a little bit of the raid in there as well. So through him fighting upwards towards the boss of this government, some truths emerge about who he is and who everyone else is, and it adds different context to what he's fighting for. And it's a fighting movie, basically, with pretty mediocre fighting. And for me, now I think we might disagree on this, but for some reason, the tone of this movie is very video gamey, and it's quite sardonic, and what they've gone for is H. John Benjamin, who I believe is video game, a TV show voiceover artist who does Archer, and I'm sure you can tell me a million other things.
Just Bob's Burgers is the main thing.
Does the inner monologue of Boy, and it's very, very fourth wall breaky. It's very, very sardonic. It's very reactive, and it's extremely grating. And I stand by that. There's not a single scene in this movie that wouldn't have been improved if the monologue, if the narrative had been removed completely. And it takes away a lot of opportunities for Bill Skarsgård to emote, as he's mute. Basically, he doesn't say anything. And that's what mute means, just in case you weren't sure. And and there's some moments where he has to pause for the narration because, without spoiling too much, there is another element to this. You can also hear this narration, which is, like many things in this movie, is a really interesting idea in practice. Unfortunately, it's so grating, and it would have been better to give him the acting responsibility to portray what the narrative is telling us, and it would have been much, 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 much better. Between the narrative and the there's some really, like, technically there's some really odd directing choices. There's one instance of the 180-degree rule, like, broken completely, and it's really disconcerting, and I don't know if he did it on purpose, but I don't think it's particularly well directed, and the fights are not great either, so a bit cold on this one.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with anything you're saying. I came down on it being sort of fine in the end. For me, it didn't actually ring video gamey, it rang comic booky. Like, if you imagine every scene of the film with like a narration bubble, that was sort of what I landed on. I think that it is occasionally really funny, but it is not funny enough to make it great. And you're right, it does remove some opportunity. I don't think anyone involved is necessarily, I don't mean to like shade anyone exactly, but I don't think that this film is up to the task of being the film you're talking about without the narration. I think Bill Skarsgård is a great actor. I don't think that this film is the one where you're going to get like that meaningful face and body language acting to get across the things that the narration is trying to get across, if that makes sense. And I think it's, again, I'm agreeing with you though. I think it's sort of worse for it. I thought that the fights were interestingly. I think that Monkey Man is a better movie, but in many ways, my direct comparison was that I actually kind of appreciated that I could at least see the fights. Like, they're not as good necessarily, but I can at least see them in a way I couldn't in Monkey Man. You know what I mean? Like, most of them are well lit. Most of them are shot with steady cams, and like from a distance where you can see. And there's some really interesting, some decently executed single take cheats happening. And if I had a big complaint about the fights, it's that Bill Skarsgård is clearly working his ass off. And Jessica Roth, who's in this as well, is clearly somebody else, which is like, clearly a stunt double. Yeah, you couldn't tell from the mask; you could just tell by like her body language is totally different. But she also wears a mask anytime she has to fight. It's clearly somebody else, and I kind of wish someone who I know to be a talented dancer had just been given the choreography. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it just turns out to be it's just kind of fine. Like, I don't think it's bad exactly. It has enough fun moments to be like background watching, or like eventually when it's on streaming, it's the kind of thing you might go and be like, watch the fights, or watch a couple of the fights, or like I will say that Charlton Copley is in this, and he has a death scene that is pretty funny. You know, there's a few things like that. There's Isaiah Mustafa is in this as the one character that the deaf mute boy can't lip read, and that gag I found really funny because he just speaks nonsense, like deadpan nonsense, the whole movie, and I did find that really funny. But it's not great. Like, it's not elevated beyond that. It's just sort of fine because of the people who are in it and the few decent gags that it has. There's a twist that you can see coming from roughly a bazillion miles away. I don't know. It's just fine. I just found it fine. I don't really know what else to say. You know, like I was whelmed by it. I wasn't underwhelmed, wasn't overwhelmed. I was just straight whelmed by it.
I think it's a shame for me. I really like Bill Skarsgård, and it's very clearly him doing the choreography, and he has put so much work into his body. Like, he is absolutely ripped to shit. Jessica Roth's character is one of my favorite parts of the movie, and yeah, it is a shame that she her character fights with a very cool like motorcycle helmet that somehow projects her thoughts on the front in like an LED screen, which is a really cool concept, like visually brilliant. And I love Jessica Roth, and this is a very, very different character to what she usually plays. This was far more serious, and she's fantastic. I would love. I don't know why I haven't seen her in more stuff since Happy Death Day, because I thought that would be like her springboard to being in everything. I think Famke Janssen is really, really good in this. I would love to see her do more work now. And I like Brett Gelman as well. I've seen Brett Gelman in a number of things now, and he's always stood out to me as being really, really good. So there's lots of potential here. There's lots of good ideas, but when you have a fight scene with the guy from the Raid, you damn well better be as good as the Raid. And when you're not as good as the Raid, like by even like 5% as good as the Raid, then you're really inviting some criticism, unfortunately.
I will say that like Brett Gelman was actually an annoying part of this movie for me.
Interesting.
Because I do actually I have really liked his performances and things. He has a very specific energy, and I think it works really well in this film. In real life, he is a Zionist piece of shit who's actively celebrated the bombing of Palestinians.
No.
And I found it.
Really?
I found it very distracting. I found him very distracting in the movie. It's you know, people will say that I should separate the art from the artist, but that's not. First off, that's not what that means. And also, like, I don't want to have supported him working exactly because he's made some pretty heinous statements since the start of the Israel-Hamas war.
We'll separate art from artist when children being openly malnourished to death is not a war tactic. There you go. That's when we can do that. Fuck. I didn't know that. That changes everything.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he's like the lone, in terms of like the performances, it's like the lone black spot for me. Like, it's probably not the best way to put that now that I've said it out loud. But he's like, it's like everyone else is great though, right? Like, I think Bill Skarsgård is actually, I do think that like by saying he doesn't like sell enough of it, I don't think he doesn't sell what he's doing. I think he does do a lot of really interesting body language and face acting in this movie. And the best scenes with the narration are when him and the narration are in sync. Like there's a really great moment where he mouths "fuck you" at someone, and then like the next few things that happen after that I thought were hilarious because him and the voiceover were in such sync. Jessica Roth is actually really good. Again, I wish she was doing her own fighting, her own choreography, but whatever. Famke Janssen is great. Michelle Dockery is clearly having the time of her life as like as the like PR person for the evil bad guys. I mean, yeah, it's weird to me that this didn't work for me as well as I might have expected. You know what I mean? It seems like it should be right up my street, but at the end of the day, it's just sort of fine. I will say though, it's going to be someone's exact cup of tea. Like it's going to be someone's shit for sure. So I encourage everyone to see it for yourself because it might not work for you, but it might really, really work for you. Because I think a lot of people are like, for me, it's either that it's either too juvenile or it's not juvenile enough, and I can't tell which it is. But for some of you out there, it's going to strike that balance perfectly. And I hope that you find it. I hope that it finds its audience. I thought it was fine, but I also think I'll probably never watch it again. So, you know,
yeah, that's pretty telling. Absolutely, I would never watch it again. There's no point. I would like to see Jessica Roth do that specific role with a better director and a better tone and a better script. Like if we could transpose her and give her the choreography into some kind of Kill Bill, John Wick situation, I would love to see that. But yeah, this movie didn't land for me at all. It was a bit shit. What it did do, and interestingly, you've talked a lot about how Monkey Man really opens up on rewatch at home, and I'm halfway through a rewatch, and it's so when you can see the frame and when you know the flow of that film, it works so much better, doesn't it? And this film has really made me appreciate how much better Monkey Man is. So thanks to this film for helping me reappraise Monkey Man, I guess. But yeah, it didn't work.
Yeah. So how many stars are you landing on? I'm feeling a 2 from you.
Two. This is a 2-star for me. Jessica Oath is great. I really like Bill Skarsgård. Criminally underused. Some great ideas, all executed terribly, I thought.
Mm-hmm. I am landing at a 3, but only barely. Uh, I think it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'll ever watch it again, but I think that it's fine. And again, I think
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to be someone's exact cup of tea. It's going to be someone's exact formative movie. Um, and I hope that that person finds this movie. You know, I want it is at least interesting, and it's not the kind of movie you expect anyway. Like, it's not just the same homogenized bullshit. It is a bit of a swing, and I appreciate that.
I think if you're 16 and play a lot of Fortnite, this is probably going to land pretty well with you. I would say it's going to feel quite
That's
edgy.
yeah. It's going to be gateway edgy. That's a good way to put it. It's going to be gateway edgy for a bunch of teenagers. So again, I encourage everyone to see this movie. If you're like 14, this is exactly the kind of movie you should be sneaking out to watch. um, and I think you'll have a great time with it. I just thought it was fine. So yeah, 3 stars.
And just then go watch better versions of this movie. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm disappointed. Actually, I wanted it to be good. I really wanted to love this film. And it didn't land for me at all.
Yeah. Well, it's not the end of the world. There's more movies in the world.
I mean, I know that's a great segue into another movie from the rest of the world. This is our second film today, so why don't you have the pleasure of talking us through Furiosa?
I will. So Furiosa, unless you've been living under a rock, you know that Furiosa is a character introduced in Mad Max Fury Road, one of the best action movies of this century so far, if not arguably all time. And this film is a prequel that takes place all the way from her childhood all the way up to basically right before Fury Road happens. So it starts in the Green Place, the place she was born as a child, and then it's told over 5 separate, discrete chapters that illuminate some important part of her life prior to Fury Road. She is played by Anya Taylor-Joy in most of this movie, except for the segments where she is still a child. And each of these segments has a distinct story to tell, and a distinct, I think I'm just repeating myself, but a distinct like illumination about the character. And it's hard to want to talk more about exactly what happens in the plot, so I won't. So I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of really interesting ideas. But the main thing to take away from this is that if you're a fan of Mad Max, this is definitely another film in that franchise. In the same way where like the micro details don't matter, but the macro ones do. To the point where like there's an actor in this movie who played a different character in the previous movie, which is not the first time that's happened in this franchise. Mm-hmm. And it's not an exact. It doesn't exactly answer the questions you think it's going to answer, but in a good way. It's the Mad Max. The great strength of the Mad Max films is that they are all campfire stories. Like they're not meant to necessarily be this one big cohesive story. They're meant to be the kinds of stories that get told around a campfire with embellishments, with unreliable narrators. Where I mean, in real life, if these were real stories in a real world, they might not even be all the same person. They might just be attributed to the same person or a similar person, or Max himself might be a myth, and so the big key difference with Furiosa here is that instead of being one of those stories, it is 5. So structurally, it's quite different from the previous films. In fact, structurally, it probably has more in common with George Miller's last film, which was 3,000 Years of Longing, which is literally Idris Elba telling Tilda Swinton's stories for 2 hours, which is actually legitimately great. I like it the more I think about it. But if you're into Mad Max, if you're into the George Miller post-apocalypse, this is also more of that. There's a lot of really great production design. There's a lot of really great aesthetic choices. You have and a lot of really great performances, but standouts for me, like Anya Taylor-Joy is great. Don't get me wrong, but Chris Hemsworth is giving an all-timer performance here, like completely dialed to 11. The biggest, best, but also weirdly relatable performance of like an insane person, an insane sociopath, the kind of insane, charismatic sociopath that might be followed in a post-apocalyptic world. Whose character also has hints at a tragic backstory that I would now love to see. And also Tom Burke, who is a guy who's been around for a long time and is a real standout performer. I don't know if you've seen The Souvenir, but he's a great actor. And he is a guy who, now that I've seen this movie, he plays a character called Praetorian Jack, who's the guy who Furiosa like learns how to be an Imperator from. He is so good in the segments of this film that he is in as her mentor, and I would love to see a prequel just for his character set around the time of like Mad Max 1, like as the world falls. There's definitely some issues with the film. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think they're deal breakers either, but in the way that the effects were very, very seamless in Fury Road, they are not that seamless here. I don't want to spoil all of it, but there's definitely some places where like the digital background is very obvious, for example, and some of the like stitches between scenes and cuts and composites are very obvious in a way that they just weren't in Fury Road. But the narrative is good enough and the performances are good enough that although I'm mentioning these things, they are not deal breakers. They are just things to be aware of. I would say it was only actually distracting one time for me. I don't know how you felt about it, Simon, but there's only one egregious one for me. But it is sort of worth noting, given how seamless Fury Road is to this day, how well it holds up, effects-wise. And honestly, I love that George Miller is just telling these stories. It's amazing. I don't think there's anyone other than George Miller and debatably Martin Scorsese who is putting so much energy into their movies, despite being, I think he's in his 70s. Like it's crazy. This movie has an energy. Yeah, he's 79, and this movie has an energy that 30-year-olds aren't conjuring these days. And it really feels like this is a film that he really wanted to tell and really wanted to make sure was like his movie, and he's a big enough name to take studio notes and just put him in a shredder, maybe. Because it's very unabashedly a George Miller film, but in a way that shares more DNA with the rest of his filmography than previous Mad Maxes have. If that does that ring true to you? That's sort of how I felt about it. So yeah. It's great. It's a great film. It's probably one of the best of the year, and it is certainly worth seeing, if only to watch Chris Hemsworth make a meal out of every single word he has to say in the whole film. So that is my 2 cents. How did you feel about it?
That's your $15. I mean, I agree with absolutely everything you've said. I haven't really got much to add, but to reiterate that George Miller has proven to be one of my favorite directors, because what's really, really clear is that aside from the energy that he puts in and his technique, he really loves exploring story technique and character-driven, like the motivations of character and the tortures of character. That's very, very Greek theatre. And when I majored in theatre, Greek theatre was a major part, and I love Greek female characters like Medea. There's so much Medea in Furiosa, and Antigone as well, and obviously, like, I know this is hyperbole, but you could argue that Miller's this generation's Euripides and Sophocles in the way that he uses the torture of a female character raging against the world and refusing to be bent by it. And it's particularly in Furiosa. Furiosa as a movie is much darker than Fury Road in terms of its violence and in terms of its the brutality of that violence. And that's very, very, very Medea as well. And it just blew me away. Just this whole film. It is not another Fury Road. There's 5 sections, and one of them, probably my favorite section of this movie, is the sequence that is literally on Fury Road. But I grew up, and one of my favorite movies for a long time was Mad Max 2, Road Warrior. Defined a lot of my interest in films for a long, long time before I even knew anything about George Miller or the rest of the series. I didn't watch the first Mad Max for a long time. I started with the second one. And it's just little things like Mad Max 2 had lots of airborne like vehicles, like things stitched together, and the Fury Road sequence had lots of airborne vehicles interacting. And there's one moment in this film where an airborne vehicle gets the parachute gets tangled into the war rig, and it becomes this like mythological kraken. I had no breath left in my body. The amount I gasped. Like what Miller does with epic storytelling, there's nobody else that's doing it like this. There's nobody else doing it with this kind of energy and this like verve and the fury. I know it's no pun intended. And Anya Taylor-Joy is fantastic. She does a great Charlize Theron voice impression, but she makes this character her own as well. And yeah, Tom Burke was fantastic too. And there's a sequence where she's trying to save Tom Burke from a situation that is incredible, just incredible, the whole thing. But Hemsworth in this, like I've said before that I don't think Hemsworth is very good. About the time where he did that medical. Oh God, he was the owner of a medical company on an island. What was that?
Talking about his Netflix sci-fi movie. I mean, that's a pretty low bar given how many of those Netflix sci-fi movies. It doesn't matter. It is bad.
Yeah. He's not great in it. I also don't think he was great. I love 2016 Ghostbusters. I don't think he's comfortable in that movie. I know you love him in that film. Right? That's another discussion. And I think he's good at Thor Ragnarok and not good in Love and Thunder. But between this, like, I have no shame in saying that Extraction 2 was the first time I looked at Chris Hemsworth doing his own accent, doing kind of his own thing, thinking, holy shit, you're really good in this film. This film blows away all of his other performances without even breaking a sweat. He is so good in this film at being this larger than life sort of warlord, but he's got so many quirks to him and he's so in it, but he's almost like believable and relatable in he's trying to do the right thing for his gang. It's just that the right thing involves killing lots and lots and lots of people, and kind of he isn't the warlord that he thinks he is. He can't control the big gang, and that gets to him as well. He can't control the power like Immortan Joe can, like the people can. Like he doesn't have that. Fascinating character. Like this movie is as much of an exploration of power and what people would do to try and get power and then can't control it, as it is about Furiosa. And like, and that's he is so good in his ups and downs and his rhythms in this film. Like mind blowing how good he is in this film.
I mean, I definitely have enjoyed him in stuff before. I would actually point out, like Ragnarok is a great performance of his, probably the best Thor performance. And the first one where he was allowed to just sort of like let his funny fly, which I think was a good choice. You're right; it's an interesting exploration of like him juxtaposed to Immortan Joe, who has created this like devout and fanatic following of war boys, whereas like Dementis is very much just like directing the chaos, like pointing the chaos and trying to point the chaos in a specific direction when he can, and trying to constantly like sate their need for more. And there's even a sequence where like there's a splinter group from his group, and it's really really interesting.
Mm.
Um, basically, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. That he's like maybe like it's a career performance. Like it's a milestone performance for him, regardless of whether you think he's good before this. This is a milestone performance for him.
Yeah.
I would also put forward that this movie makes Immortan Joe way more interesting. Like this movie makes Fury Road better because it makes Immortan Joe a more interesting character, and
more damage.
Played by I think his name is pronounced. How do you pronounce his name? I'm just gonna look it up. I think it's Lacey Hulme, who's an Australian actor. Because obviously Hugh Keays-Byrne passed away a couple years ago. He still manages to be. He is utterly terrifying. Like Immortan Joe is terrifying in this movie, but also it shows him with like conferring with advisors and like clearly being the brains that Dementis wishes he was.
Absolutely.
And it's easy to see why. Like I don't want to spoil exactly the narrative, but like if you wonder why someone like Furiosa was even on Immortan Joe's team at the beginning of Fury Road, like this movie makes it clear why she would make that choice. And I think that like this movie, I still think Fury Road is a better film personally. I think that this movie makes that movie better though. I think this movie really illuminates parts of that movie that and give it context that make it a better film. And I think that it would have been very easy to just do Fury Road again, or let's be honest, to just do the fucking Road Warrior and also the third act of Thunderdome again. But I think not doing that is probably the smartest thing George Miller did here. Because it would just be another movie in the franchise if it was that. But this movie being divided up into 5 set pieces, 5 set stories with 5 different kinds of set pieces in them, makes it a more interesting exploration of the wasteland. And I know people, we're in this hellscape where this movie made like $30 million or something over the weekend, and everyone's calling it a box office disappointment. And we're calling it a box office disappointment on the Friday it came out, because that's the world we live in. And I really hope that, like, if you're listening to this, please go see this movie because we need more of these movies. I don't know that, George Miller's 79 years old. He's not going to last forever, and eventually, Warner Brothers is going to try and make a movie without him, and it's not going to be as good. So let's get another movie out of him while we can.
George Miller said just before Furiosa's release that he has written the story of Max in the time frame of Furiosa, like what he was up to leading up to her story in Fury Road. It's written as a novella, and if it's made will completely depend on whether Furiosa is deemed a success at the box office. So I hate that it's already been treated as a failure.
I mean, it's just like we live in a world where like it made $80 million in its first weekend, and that is somehow a failure, Yeah. But again, like this movie came out on the 23rd of May, and people were talking about it as a failure on the 23rd of May based on box office projections. It's definitely true that the Memorial Day weekend in the States was the softest Memorial Day weekend in history, but blaming that on the movies that came out is such a mistake. Like, the box office has been softening since the pandemic for lots of different reasons, and you can't just focus on the movies that came out to explain that. You have to explain how, like, people just aren't going to movies like they are. Like, we're in an interesting cultural shift where movies are losing their supremacy as a thing in culture, and I think that is tragic, but also super interesting. And I hope that we study that in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit. It doesn't feel like it's gonna get back to what we would perceive as normal anytime soon. For a lot of reasons we talked about in our Patreon episodes as well, the consolidation, everything's got to be a hit. And also, I think there's a big factor is that they advertised and put the 4K release up for sale the day the movie got released. And that's got to play into people just thinking, well, I'll just watch it at home as well.
Well, it doesn't help that, like, you know, The Fall Guy, for better or for worse, was on digital like 2 weeks after it came out. And I think it all just plays into, like, films aren't allowed to find their legs anymore. Every film has to be an event. It has to be an event in the first 3 days or it's a failure. And I feel like that's such a mistake. But as I think we've talked about before, we're definitely in an era of the business of filmmaking. You know, like Walt Disney famously said that they don't make money to make movies, or they don't make movies to make money. They make money to make movies. And I feel like we're in an era where that is flipped. And it's bad for art. So.
It's bad, and also the cinemas don't care about the experience. So many people like us, like when I went to watch Fury Road in the finale, where she's just about to go do the thing in the car, a guy took a phone call next to me.
What?
I took him to his phone. Yeah, just took a phone call. All right. And so I missed about 2 minutes worth of the Furiosa finale because I was just staring at him. And it just completely drags you out of the moment. And people don't.
Egregious.
Every film we go to now has, like, the last time we went to see something, I had to tell someone in front of me to put their phone away because people don't care about focusing on one thing for 2 hours. Like, they are unable to do that. And worse, the cinemas, apart from your American group, I can't remember, the Mondo affiliated people.
Alamo Drafthouse.
Right. Alamo openly, like, if you use your phone, you're fucking out. You're gone. Cineplex don't give a shit. In fact, they don't care. There's nobody in that screening to stop you using your phone. It even happened in a preview.
Every hour, a Cineplex employee walks through and signs off on a logbook with their phone in their fucking hand.
So I don't want to go to the cinema anymore because my blood pressure can't take it. If I'm spending $25 just on a ticket and then double that on snacks if I'm eating, and someone's just going to use it as their front room and use that and text during the movie, like, why should I do that instead of watching it on my nice big TV at home, Cineplex? If you don't maintain the cinema experience, nobody's going to pay for it.
Well, I mean, that's sort of it, right? Like, the part of the reason the cinema is maybe dying is that, so I went and saw Furiosa on a weekday. So the tickets were $20-ish each, $21 each for 2 of us. So it's $42. There's a $2 fee for purchasing them online, which is the bullshittiest bullshit there is. And it's only $2 because I'm a scene member. It would be $3 otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And for the record, I've booked tickets that I've had to cancel, and you don't get that $2 back. That's just a fee for nothing. It's a fee for nothing. Obviously, on a weekday, this is going to be more expensive, but parking for that movie was $17. So now we're at $60. And then we got the popcorn combo where we each got our own, like, small popcorn instead of one big one. And that was $50. Like 2 popcorns, 2 drinks, and 2 candy. It was like, so we spent $110 to go see Furiosa when we did. And, like, I'm just saying that, like, maybe that's too much, you know? And it's been creeping up for a long time, and maybe it's just hit critical mass. But, like, the reason the movie has to be an event is that cost of living is out of control. Cost of living expenses are out of control, and movies are ultimately a luxury. And people are just not going to spend $100. Or even, we went to a movie yesterday, which for the record was Saturday, and it was not AVX, like, not the big sound or anything. So those tickets were like $17 each, but that's already like 30 something, 34. We got the combo that was 1 big popcorn and 2 drinks. That was $30, and weekend parking was $12. So we're still at like $70. You know, like
bullshit.
It's a lot, and I can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine. I can just do the math, but like anyone who has, say, 2 children to go see a movie,
Yeah, we can't.
Right? Like it's
We can't do it. We can't afford that.
The cost of that luxury is out of reach now.
Mm-hmm.
And as a side note, I will say that like you took some guy took a phone call on your screening. Some guy, 2 dads brought their no more than 8-year-olds to this movie when we saw it, which I thought was a real choice. I think that
Furiosa?
Like, yeah.
What?
Yeah, 2 like kids, and to be fair, the kids were very well behaved, but also perhaps scarred. I don't know, like
shit. Oh my god.
And I'm not usually protective like that. Like I think there's definitely like a 10 or 12-year-old should probably sneak out and watch this movie, or like pirate it and watch it without their parents' consent. But an 8-year-old with your dad, like that's weird. That's a weird choice, right? That's maybe. I've never felt overly protective when it comes to art, except for like there are things where like it's a bit much for a kid that young. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's absolutely too
much. And I'm the guy who's like, I watched RoboCop when I was like 9, so like yeah, sure. That's a thank you for lying.
So maybe don't watch. It's infuriating.
Yeah.
But going back, sorry, we're ranting again, I know, but it's not the experience that we loved growing up, that we were passionate about growing up, that we did as a family growing up. And that makes me sad because it's just a fucking business like the rest of the industry now. Yeah. Going back to Furiosa, you're totally right about the effects. I think it's really interesting. Someone far cleverer than me did a little article about how Fury Road had more practical stunts in particular, and there's a certain looseness and a certain improvisation to practical stunts that you don't get in composite, like green screen stunts. So that was a bit more noticeable. But I found it very, very interesting because Fury Road's got a CG shot in every single shot that is almost invisible. But in Fury Road, they were very, very noticeable, and I know exactly the one you're talking about. And I wonder why. I wonder if that's a safety concern after the stories that came out of the Fury Road set. I wonder if that's a budgetary concern. I wonder what the reason was behind that. But it didn't stop it being spectacular, just very noticeable.
I don't have any inside baseball on this, but my guess is that it famously, in the making of Fury Road, there was a moment where they literally thought they had killed someone, and I think they were probably just trying to avoid that again. Like yes. in the scene where the war rig flips at the end, when they shot that, they thought they legitimately thought they had killed someone. I think it was the war rig shot, and like watching the special features on that movie and watching the way that everyone's reacting, like there was a real like come to Jesus moment about what might have happened in that moment that only very narrowly didn't happen. And I feel like this movie is probably trying to avoid some of that. So I do think it was probably just a safety thing.
Yeah, maybe. Tom Hardy said that he took his kid to set on the day where he was hanging out at the war rig with Furiosa holding onto his leg, and he's got cables attached, and they're going at like 40 miles an hour. And the kid was like, is my dad safe? And George Miller's like, yeah, it's held up with the cables. The kids, what if the cables snap? And George Miller apparently said, well, I guess he'll die, and just walked off. So, yeah, maybe it is a safety thing.
I mean, it's one of those stories that I have a hard time believing, but also definitely believe.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it can't be that brazen. But also...
It's that Australian sense of humor as well.
Maybe it was that brazen. I don't
know. Can I please implore people, if you like Mad Max Fury Road and all the Mad Max series and Furiosa, please go and watch Happy Feet 1, which is another exploration of Greek tragic storylines. But then go and watch Happy Feet 2, which is one of the best movies ever made. And I'm not saying kids' movies, I'm not saying animated movies. Happy Feet 2 is a genuine, certified film masterpiece. And it is very, very deep and very, very funny and absolutely incredible piece of movie making.
I mean, Guy rarely misses. It's interesting. His filmography is really, really interesting because it's the same guy who made Mad Max also made the Babe movies. Although he only directed this, he only directed the second one. I think he wrote and produced this, wrote and produced the first one, and directed the second one. But also again, like Happy Feet and Lorenzo's Oil and 3,000 Years of Longing. Like it's although to be fair,
The Witches of Eastwick.
Well, The Witches of Eastwick is great.
Oh, I should watch that.
Really great Jack Nicholson performance. What was I going to say? Basically, he's a really interesting and eclectic filmmaker, and all of his films have a certain feeling of controlled chaos about them that I really appreciate, and a really clear voice and aesthetic. This is definitely the kind of film I've told friends of ours are going to see this today, and they're like, "We're going to go see it." I'm like, "Great, go see it in IMAX." Because you do want to see this on the biggest screen you can possibly see it on. Yeah.
How many stars are you going with here?
It's 4 for me. 4 out of 5. You?
It's a 5. I came out thinking, is this a 4.5? And then I realized it, and I thought about one particular scene, and I'm thinking, what am I comparing? If I'm comparing to Fury Road, it's not quite as effective as Fury Road. If I'm comparing this as a piece of filmmaking, this is a 5 out of 5 every day of the week. It's an incredible, and the more I think about it, the more incredible it gets. It's an incredible piece of Greek storytelling with a great female protagonist and great supporting cast and incredible scenes and colors and exploration of power, and it's way deeper than Fury Road is. Yeah, and I think Fury Road is perhaps the more pure movie, and that's perhaps why it works a bit better on the whole. But holy shit, what a film! What a film! 5 out of 5 every day of the week.
Definitely see it as soon as you can, and because we want more of them as well. Yeah.
Please. Okay. Well, should we wrap it?
Yeah, we should wrap it up there. If you're listening to this, thank you so much for listening. You made it to the end. We're very proud of you. We're very glad that you're here. If you've liked what we've been talking about, please, there's a number of ways you can support the show. One of which is if you go to this episode's homepage, which will be linked in the show notes. We do post just watched powered streaming links. So links that'll point you to anywhere you can buy, rent, or stream the movies we talked about. And if you use those links, we do get a small referral, which is great. And they also update based on your availability, your location, and the film's availability. So if they're not available today, just check back. And when they are available, you can click on them. It'll take you wherever you need to be. This is also true of every film we've covered in the last several years. So it's maybe a weird thing to ask, but if you're looking to watch a film, search up on our website and use the links. We would be very appreciative of that. We do also have a Patreon. Every week we record. We do a bonus episode. This week we talked about... what did we talk about? We talked about the state of gaming for a while. We talked about underseen or underappreciated 90s films.
And then studios buying each other.
And then like the business of cinema, yeah.
A little bit cynical, but
also I think an interesting discussion. And every Patreon supporter from the lowest tier to the top gets access to the bonus episodes, and the lowest tier is $2 Canadian a month. Last but not least, you can also support us in just by, if you like this episode, give us a 5-star rating. If you like the show, subscribe on your podcasting platforms of choice. Those things help us get in front of more earballs, and we would very much appreciate it. We also, just to wrap up, as always, are in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. And congratulations, you made it all the way to the end. Thank you so much for joining us on this awesome Friday.